Well, blow us down. They went ahead and did it. And let's say it loud and clear. The polls were wrong, the media was wrong, the global elite was wrong. Donald Trump was right.
We have a great economic plan. We will double our growth and have the strongest economy anywhere in the world.
Like wind over water, this rebellion is sweeping the world. First Brexit in Britain, now Trump across the United States. So what next? The mood at the heart of liberal America was funereal today. This was no ordinary election, no ordinary defeat, and no ordinary dawn.
This is not the outcome we wanted or we worked so hard for, and I'm sorry that we did not win this election.
White House staff were said to be in tears this morning. The president tried to strike a tone that sounded something like reconciliation.
We are now all rooting for his success in uniting and leading the country.
Tonight, the questions crowd in upon us. Was this a rebellion of angry white men against a changing world? Was it a revolt against global capitalism and its elite? Was it the ultimate incarnation of the celebrity age? And where will the revolution end? Could we be even looking at the rise of the far right in elections in France come the spring? Emma Murphy is down on America's southern border. Are they about to start building that wall? Robert Peston assesses what Trump's victory will mean for Brexit Britain. Dan Rivers is in Moscow as cheers break out in the Russian parliament at Trump's triumph. Also tonight, 7 passengers are dead and more than 50 others injured as a tram derails in South London.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby in Washington.
Good evening. Back in June last year, a business tycoon and star of America's version of The Apprentice announced he was a candidate for president. He wasn't taken altogether seriously. Indeed, he was the 150-to-1 outsider. But in the end, Donald Trump beat the ultimate insider, Hillary Clinton, against the odds. The biggest political upset in American politics ever. Like the Brexit vote back in Britain, Mr. Trump tapped into a mood of frustration with the rhythms of traditional politics. He's a disruptor, he says so himself. In his acceptance speech, the bitterness of the campaign, though, melted away. He talked of unifying America. He was generous towards Mrs. Clinton. She, in turn, congratulated him and said sorry to her supporters. The current president, Barack Obama, said he would hand over graciously, as his predecessor, George W. Bush, had done to him. Mr. Obama and Mr. Trump will indeed meet at the White House tomorrow. Mr. Trump's Republican Party did not, after all, fracture around him, but sealed instead its control of Congress. No one, perhaps not even Mr. Trump, knows what the future holds. Today, though, his supporters were celebrating an extraordinary triumph against all the odds.
Nothing can prepare a man for such a moment. The beneficiary of a political earthquake, Trump has ridden a populist insurrection all the way to the White House. One of the most remarkable and unexpected outcomes in the history of this republic.
Thank you.
His supporters were jubilant. And Donald Trump first spoke of the phone call from his opponent, who he has baited for a year, calling her a crook and her family a criminal enterprise.
I've just received a call from Secretary Clinton. She congratulated us, it's about us, on our victory. And I congratulated her and her family on a very, very hard-fought campaign. I mean, she fought very hard.
And then he promised a pivot that left his opponents deeply skeptical. A man who has made provocation his calling card, insisting he would now play the role of healer-in-chief.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. It's time. I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me.
Trump, the projected winner in North Carolina. Donald Trump is the apparent winner in Florida. In Idaho.
This was shock after seismic shock. The Trump team watched in disbelief. The billionaire patriarch of this new first family had even prepared his concession speech. It left Hillary Clinton's supporters in tears. For many, this was only slightly less than a national trauma. Late this morning, Mrs. Clinton stepped forward to make her concession. No questioning of the outcome, only a warning that trampling on American values will be resisted.
This is painful, and it will be for a long time. Donald Trump is going to be our president. We owe him an open mind and the chance to lead.
But to a president-elect who has threatened to deport millions and ban a religion from entering the US, she spoke of the rule of law and of equality for all.
We respect and cherish these values too, and we must defend them.
And recognizing that America's ultimate glass ceiling has not, after all, been shattered, she had this message for one group of Americans.
And to all the little girls who are watching this, never doubt that you are valuable and powerful and deserving of every chance and opportunity in the world to pursue and achieve your own dreams.
Outside the White House overnight, there were protests at the direction the country has now moved in. We may witness anger and division on a scale that America hasn't seen since the civil rights era.
And we have a guy that's a white nationalist. It's just disgusting to me, and I've seen this happen with Brexit, and I've seen this happen around the world, and it's just so saddening to me that this could possibly happen to our nation, a nation that I find so great and so beautiful.
And elsewhere in other cities, immigrants and young Americans took to the streets. This is also a crushing, even legacy-ending blow for the president. He must watch his prized reforms being reversed and ultimately hand over to a new commander-in-chief, who he has said cannot be trusted with the nuclear codes. But today he insisted he will execute a seamless transition of power.
And one thing you realize quickly in this job is that the presidency and the vice presidency is bigger than any of us. We are now all rooting for his success in uniting and leading the country. The peaceful transition of power is one of the hallmarks of our democracy. And over the next few months, we are going to show that to the world.
It is entirely unclear what a President Trump means for America or for the world.
It's my honor. It was an amazing evening. It's been an amazing 2-year period. And I love this country. Thank you.
Will he govern as he campaigned? Will he be impulsive and incendiary? Or will Trump be a pragmatist, even a centrist, reaching out to those he has deeply offended? On that question may rest the very stability of America's system of government. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
So, as Robert asked there, will President Trump be an ideologue or a pragmatist? Apart from talking about being a unifier, he gave no more clues today. During the campaign, he talked about building a wall with Mexico, of course, creating jobs, banning certain immigrants, and overturning President Obama's plan to widen access to healthcare. So will he be able to keep his promises?
It's the morning after the all-night party which divided America, and through the hangover, Americans are asking if Trump can deliver on his promises.
President Trump, let's go!
His overwhelming victory suggests there was more than one unifying message that took him over the line, but upending the political elite was central.
Did you take your inspiration from Brexit?
I tell you what, I love Britain, first of all. I think it's just great. And we have our own little Brexit right here, but it's been...
He's consolidated more power than even his supporters dared to dream. But they now expect him to deliver on promises to introduce trade barriers and bring back jobs to America.
To his supporters, Donald Trump represents a new dawn. But to his opponents, he's a loose cannon with a campaign of outrageous threats and promises. As he prepares to enter the White House, America is holding its breath.
His pledge to build a 1,000-mile wall stretching across the Mexican border is probably unrealistic, especially as he wants Mexico to pay. But his other tough immigration policies may be enforceable. He wants to deport 2 million criminal illegal immigrants and introduce extreme vetting of Muslims entering the country. He said he'll give military generals 30 days to submit a plan to defeat ISIS. That too's unlikely, but he probably will be able to achieve his promise to repeal Obamacare, the health insurance scheme. But for those who believe in him, his first 100 days can't start soon enough.
If he does what he says he's going to do, everyone prospers. And so it may not be that the American public will, all of a sudden, we're going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but actions speak louder than words.
I'm just so glad for real people in the real world who have to live a hard life.
It's actually a defining moment for a country that needs to heal. And this is a guy that's going to come in who's not a career politician. He's going to heal the country.
But his opponents say under pressure in office, Donald Trump will struggle. The current occupant of Trump Tower has a new address to move to and an in tray of much hyped policies to deliver when he gets there. America and the world will be watching. Penny Marshall, News at 10, New York.
Once again, as with Brexit in the UK, the pollsters predicted, in effect, a continuation of the status quo. No upset, no radical change, still less a revolution. How wrong they were again. It had all seemed to be going Mrs. Clinton's way. It looked like her years of politics and indeed public service were finally going to result in a return to the White House as president this time, not as First Lady. In a moment, we'll hear from our Washington correspondent, Robert Moore. But let's cross first to James Mates, who's in New York. James, as I said, it once looked so good for her. How, in your view, did she lose and why?
Well, you know, early on, Donald Trump spotted something. That 4 years ago, Mitt Romney lost by 64 electoral college votes. The 4 big Rust Belt states in the north of Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania contain precisely 64 electoral college votes. Ronald Reagan had won conservative working-class Democrat voters there. He thought he could do the same. The Democrats never took that threat seriously. They thought they had the support in the cities, and they did. They won 31 out of 35 of the biggest cities in the US. But they forgot that in between those cities are vast open spaces full of people who were voting Trump. The Democrats also had plenty of warning about the anti-establishment wave in Europe, about the collapse of traditional centre-left parties in Europe, not least from the Brexit vote. And yet they chose the ultimate insider establishment candidate. They wouldn't budge from from their strategy even after the Bernie Sanders insurgency. They simply never believed that another insurgent, this time Donald Trump, could beat them.
I mean, James, one can only imagine what Mrs. Clinton is feeling tonight. I'm assuming this is the end of a political dynasty.
Very much so, and it is a dynasty. I described them as sort of closest thing to political royalty here, and it had got to the stage where people were seriously talking about, after the inevitable Hillary presidency, that her daughter Chelsea would then run for president. Ever since 1992, when Bill Clinton won the White House, the Clintons have held the Democratic Party in an absolute iron grip. Even during the Bush and the Obama years, they controlled the money and they controlled the major appointments. That's why Hillary's nomination was always an inevitability, why no other serious mainstream candidate really put themselves forward for it. That dynasty is dead tonight.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go back to Robert Moore, our Washington correspondent. Robert, When Donald Trump said the many things he did, the racist things, the misogynistic things, the media here clearly thought that their viewers and readers all across America, usually thought to be socially conservative, would find it offensive and effectively disbarring him from high office. But they just, in the end, they didn't think like that, did they? Why, in your view?
Well, Tom, let's remember that actually yesterday, although Hillary Clinton lost the Electoral College vote and hence the presidency, it appears tonight she actually won the national vote. So for millions of Americans, tens of millions of Americans, Donald Trump's conduct and behavior was actually disqualifying. But there is no denying that his passionate, his politically incorrect, his anti-establishment, anti-elitist message was relished by voters, particularly in those sort of small town and rural areas. He quite brilliantly articulated the anxieties and insecurities of middle America, and ultimately that mattered more than those allegations of sexual assault, mattered more than his coarse language or indeed his hollow and often wild policies.
Robert, I don't know whether you heard, but we just had Penny talking about those promises. Let's be honest, he made a lot of promises. How many of them is he going to be able to keep, do you think?
Well, just think, you know, I've been down with him in Appalachia, in sort of Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, and he's promised at a stroke of his future presidential pen of resurrecting the coal industry, or in the Midwest he has promised to resurrect the steel industry, or in the southern border to build that impenetrable 2,000-mile wall. In no case do any experts really believe those are practical propositions. So, Tom, having promised so much to so many people, there is a real potential for this presidency to equally rapidly disappoint that constituency.
OK, Robert, for now at least, thank you very much indeed. Well, in his victory speech this morning, Mr. Trump promised that the forgotten man and woman would never be forgotten again. It has been said that the media took his promises on things like building the Mexican wall literally, but that his supporters did not. Rather, they heard a commitment to tougher immigration controls and took that at least seriously. It seems that kind of rhetoric was decisive for Mr. Trump in the swing states. Now, in places like Ohio, Trump supporters believe they finally have a real champion on his way to the White House.
The political map here has turned red. White, blue-collar workers have spoken. Donald Trump connected with this group more than any other. Big promises of a bright future. He's given them hope, but can he deliver?
He's going to try. It's time to change Washington. The buddies system needs to change.
When Americans put their minds to it, we could do whatever we want. We could do great things, so I don't see any problems with anything he's promised.
He said he'd bring steel jobs, he said he'd bring
I'm hoping
prosperity.
he does that, change the NAFTA laws. I hope he does that.
Is this a good thing for America?
I think it is.
So once again, the polls and the predictions have been confounded. They simply hadn't detected the strength of feeling in all these swing states, just as the frustrations of the people who live here had been ignored by Washington for years. And it seems Trump's appeal had percolated out to a broader demographic than many had thought possible. Here in the Rust Belt, he found patriotic backing among members of the middle class too.
I think it's fantastic that the liberals have been stopped in the American public. The sleeping bear has been awakened.
People don't come to America anymore to be Americans. They bring their own faith and their own culture here, and they want to continue that. And you can't do that and stay united as Americans. We need to be Americans.
I think we're going to get some improvement in immigration, border control. I think taxes will be reduced, and I think business will increase.
So for this part of America and beyond, what if becomes what now? President Trump has a lot to live up to. Martin Geisler, News at 10, Youngstown, Ohio.
Mr. Trump's hostility to Mexico, or at least Mexicans, was always likely to ensure a nervous response there to his victory. Its currency, the peso, fell by 7% because, of course, of Mr. Trump's plan to end a free trade deal. But the economic impact is only half the story. His tough line on immigration will affect the everyday lives and hopes of thousands of people. At Laredo on the Mexican border, they are already trying to calculate what the cost of this victory is likely to be.
It's a long way from Washington, but at the heart of Donald Trump's push for power. This is the US-Mexican border, a 1,900-mile stretch which the president-elect is determined to fortify. Every day 1 million people go back and forth, but it's the 700,000 who make the journey illegally that concerns the future president and much of his electorate.
You have to have a wall, absolutely.
It was here in the town of Laredo that he announced his plans for Fortress America and the much-discussed wall.
The wall will save you a tremendous amount of money, but there are areas that you have to have the wall.
Such talk caused alarm at the time in this border town, and so has Donald Trump's victory. Melissa Frias lives in Mexico but travels legally every day to study in the US. She now fears for her future.
I came to Laredo to try to get a better life, to study and eventually work here. But now with this, I don't know what will happen. I don't know how the system is going to work in the future. So I'm a little bit concerned about that.
The official border runs right through the center of the Rio Grande. Many illegals find quiet places to swim across, given the close proximity of the two countries. This is American territory, and just behind me is Mexico. If Donald Trump built his wall, it would run directly between the two countries. He says any wall would be impenetrable, physically tall, powerful and beautiful. And that appeals, interestingly, to Mexicans who now live permanently in the US.
I have relatives in Mexico, and they were hoping Hillary would win. And they were after me because, why are you voting for Trump? I said, because Trump wants to secure our borders. He wants to make sure his people are safe.
Donald Trump may never build his wall, but he has built a belief that he's the man to protect America and its borders. Emma Murphy, News at 10, on the US-Mexico border.
If you weren't watching through the night and it was a shock when you woke up this morning, imagine what it was like for Americans, whichever way they had voted. There was only one topic of conversation on the American version of the old Clapham omnibus, New York Staten Island ferry, this morning. Julie joined the commuters to try and assess their verdict.
Whatever New Yorkers made of the result in the cold light of morning, at least it meant an end to a campaign which has exhausted America. Joining the thousands of commuters boarding the Staten Island ferries to Manhattan, we found opinions as sharply divided as the nation itself.
My reaction is fear. I'm really afraid. He got elected not on a message of coming together. He got elected on a message of tearing us apart, of not being a president for all of us. This is the message that he was elected on, and this is the message that the populace decided that they wanted to go with.
But just a few feet away, one man bursting with excitement at what the new day had brought.
I'm the happiest guy in the world right now. I swear to God, I'm happy. I'm due for change, and so is everybody else, and this is the best thing in the world. Just give him a chance, and I think it'll be good not only for our country, I think it'll be good for the whole world.
As the world woke up, all eyes turned to Wall Street. One of its workers told us she'd voted for Trump, but with trepidation.
I was actually quite shocked that he won. I did vote for him, I'm going to say that very proudly, because I wanted a change. I think we all did, but I'm still scary not knowing what the next 4 years is going to bring.
And what about those who wanted Hillary Clinton to make history, their hopes and dreams now dashed?
It was very disappointing. I was ready to have a first Madam President, which would have been exciting. And my mom was especially excited because she didn't think she would be able to vote for a woman for president.
It would have been pretty amazing, you know, as her being First Lady in the White House. It would have been pretty amazing. And, you know, for my daughters, you know, I would be like, you know, you can be whatever you want to be when you grow up, but you just have to put your mind to it and focus.
How soon do you think you'll see a woman in the White House?
I think years from now. I think years from now. It will always be a battle.
For now, this fight for the White House is over, but just one short trip on a New York ferry shows the challenge to bring the country together is only just beginning. Julie Etchingham, News at 10, New York.
If our relationship with America was already changing after the Brexit vote, it may well, of course, change again now. But Theresa May was quick off the mark today to congratulate Mr. Trump and to say she looked forward to working with him.
We have a long-standing and enduring special relationship which is built on our shared values of freedom, of democracy and enterprise. And I look forward to working with President-elect Trump to ensure that we can maintain the security and prosperity of our two nations in the future.
And as for the chief engineer of our seismic Brexit shift himself, Nigel Farage, there was plenty of admiration.
This is the most powerful man in the world, and he's about to change around the direction of America. This is bigger than Brexit.
Our political editor, Robert Peston, joins us now from Downing Street. Robert, we've lived through a couple of political revolutions already in the last year. What do you make particularly of what lessons or comparisons we can draw between what we've seen here and Brexit?
Well, first of all, I agree with Nigel Farage that this is at least as big as our Brexit decision because of the way that Trump will endeavour to shake up the way that America governs itself and America's position in the world. And it's like Brexit in three important respects. First of all, the establishment was completely wrong-footed by the Brexit vote and completely wrong-footed by the election of Trump. Second, this was a revolt of millions of people, especially white men on middle and lower incomes, against that very establishment, who they thought were running their countries, running the global economy to enrich the elite, but not them. And finally, both Brexit and what's happened in America represents a leap into the unknown. In the case of Brexit, because we are so intertwined with the European Union that unravelling much of that is so complicated. And in the case of the election of Trump, his policies are unorthodox and seen by many as very risky, such as, for example, saying he thinks Japan should be allowed to become a nuclear weapons holding power because of his admiration for Russia, because of his equivocal attitude to NATO. I could go on and on.
OK, but in hard practical terms, in terms of our relationship with America, how do you think that will change?
Well, let's be clear, this is a massive challenge for Theresa May. America is perceived to be, and has been for decades, our closest ally outside of Europe, both militarily, diplomatically, and in terms of the economy. But Trump stands for so many approaches to the world that are completely contrary to what Theresa May and British governments themselves have championed. We're in favour of free trade. He's in favour of protectionism. He is equivocal to NATO. We think that NATO is absolutely central to the way that you bring order and stability to the world. The getting close to Trump for Theresa May, despite her warm words today, is going to be one hell of a challenge.
Robert, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, by this stage in the programme, we probably don't need any more proof of what a startling result it has been. But you imagine the Russian parliament applauding any other US presidential election result, can you? Ever? No, indeed. But that is exactly what happened this morning. President Putin offered his congratulations on television. Any new US-Russian relationship could, of course, have knock-ons around the world. Over Syria, for example. Then there's Iran. There's also Mr. Trump's indifference towards NATO. US foreign policy looks like it will be rather different in Mr. Trump's New World Order.
The Russian parliament is not known for spontaneous applause, yet that's exactly what greeted news of Donald Trump's victory. Not that surprising given the warm words traded between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin recently. A friendship which further blossomed today as he became the first world leader to congratulate President-elect Trump.
But Russia is ready and wants to restore the full-fledged relations with the United States.
Russian TV was less diplomatic, using lookalikes to sum up a polarizing election that has shown the worst of the United States. But there is also a degree of scepticism in some parts of the Russian political establishment towards a man whose rhetoric might not match his actions.
Trump said that he would be in alliance, or at least in partnership with Russia fighting terrorism. But again, what was said during the electoral campaign has to be divided by two and subjected to serious doubts.
Donald Trump has repeatedly said he wants a closer relationship with Russia, calling President Putin a strong leader. He doesn't seem to think NATO should stand in Russia's way, saying the organisation is obsolete. And he supported Russia's intervention in Syria, saying, "I'm all for Russia going in and dropping bombs on ISIS." Though on the nuclear deal with Iran, agreed by President Obama with Russia's involvement, he said it's the worst deal ever negotiated. President-elect Trump may restore relations with Russia in a far more dramatic way than Hillary Clinton's failed reset 6 years ago. His pivot towards Moscow may involve lifting sanctions, giving President Putin a far freer hand in Ukraine and Syria, weakening NATO. And taken together with an unravelling of the Iranian nuclear deal, many worry his Russian bear hug could lead to a dangerous struggle. This evening, Russians were digesting news which may radically alter the world order. Already tectonic geopolitical shifts are occurring. Cuba's announcing military exercises to counter enemy actions. Every aspect of President Obama's legacy seems at risk, something that will satisfy many Russians. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Moscow.
Well, the momentous events here in the United States should not overshadow a really terrible accident back in Britain. A crowded tram that was travelling faster than it should have been as it took dozens of people to work in South London tipped over. The driver has been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. At least 7 of the passengers were killed, more than 50 were injured. It's not hard to realise why when you see the pictures from the scene.
The 2-carriage tram lies on its side on a sharp bend beyond a junction. It was just after 6 a.m. in the darkness of a morning commute when it left the rails, bringing death and injury. Rescue crews used cutting equipment to free some of those trapped inside for hours. One of those injured spoke of the horrific scenes inside.
Normally the bend will hit about 6-7 miles per hour. It felt like we hit the bend about 50 to 70 miles per hour, and it just slingshotted everyone to the other side of the tram, people on top of the people. I've got up and there's just claret everywhere, there's bodies everywhere, people screaming, crying. It was just something really like a horror movie, really.
More than 50 people were injured, some seriously, as the severity of the crash became clear.
Crews, as you've already heard, have worked tirelessly with colleagues from the other emergency services to rescue a significant number of injured passengers throughout the course of this morning, some of whom were unfortunately trapped by the nature of the derailment.
Police say the driver has been arrested and is being held on suspicion of manslaughter. Accident investigators say the tram was travelling at a significantly higher speed than is permitted.
There is an investigation that's begun, which has been conducted by the Rail Accident Investigation Bureau and the British Transport Police. You'll be aware that one arrest has been made, and I think we've got to let that investigation take its course.
As the recovery work goes on, the loss of life here has left this community in a deep sense of shock, with many questions over how this happened. With 8 people suffering life-threatening injuries, it's feared the death toll could rise. Neil Connery, News at 10, Croydon.
And the police there say they will be working through the night and for a number of days to find out exactly what happened. Now, let's move back here to Washington, and Robert Moore joins us once again. Robert, it has been, what would we say, an extraordinary night, an extraordinary 24 hours. Can I ask you maybe for a final reflection on it?
Well, I think my final thought, Tom, is the excruciating day that lies ahead for Barack Obama when he meets Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Just think about this for a second. America's first black president has to host a man who, whether he rejected it or not, had the active support of the KKK. A president who must host a man who is the godfather of the birther movement, namely the racist lie that the president wasn't born in the United States and therefore was never qualified to be America's 44th president. So I think, Tom, it's important tonight not to try and normalise the outcome of this election. It has been a tremendous shock, and tonight it's not entirely clear how well the system can absorb it.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Donald Trump's win gave this morning's newspaper headline writers here plenty to go on. The Desert Sun in California hints at his property empire, saying the outsider caused an upset. The Los Angeles Daily News highlighted his previous job on The Apprentice, perhaps inevitably back in Britain. Tomorrow's Times says America has given Mr. Trump a chance. And the Mirror shows America's Statue of Liberty, apparently with her head in her hands. But perhaps the last word should go to the Elon Times, a local weekly in northeast Scotland, where Mr. Trump has a golf course. Its website has the headline, Aberdeenshire business owner wins presidential election. Possibly the understatement of the century. Finally, it may be for political historians to work out what really happened here in the past 24 hours, or indeed the past 2 years. Plenty would seem to be the instant verdict. It's true that Washington is not America, but today its residents were reeling at the revolution within. The establishment was grappling with the concept of a true outsider, the liberal elite with its nemesis. In a country that always does big better than any on earth, this was a night like no other.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Some statistics are already in. Poorer working Americans switched in large numbers away from the Democrats. Their wages have stagnated for decades. Fact. Not the answer, perhaps, but not a bad place to start. But far beyond this capital's quiet streets, the people of this country rebelled, just as their forefathers once had. For many, Brexit was a rallying cry. The question tonight, then, was this the end of a revolution or just the beginning? And that is it for tonight. I'll be here again tomorrow night as America begins the countdown to the Trump presidency in 71 days' time. For now, good night, and thank you very much for watching.